Ladies and gentlemen.
I hunger, coward.
You are now listening to Retro Radio.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second week of Retro Radio, your only online real player source of classic arcade game emulation news, information, interviews, and everything else. I'm Shane Monroe, your host. Welcome to the program. Most of today's show is going to be an interview with Mike Cuddy, one of the programmers from the Alliance Corp, makers of the soon-to-be-released RetroCade emulator. My guest this week is Mike Cuddy, one of the programmers of Alliance Corp, makers of the exciting forthcoming emulator RetroCade, currently in private beta testing. Throughout the interview, please watch your real player window for exclusive RetroCade interface and game screen snapshots. Just remember you saw them first on the Retro Radio program. Now let's get started with the interview. Mike, would you please briefly summarize exactly what RetroCade is and why it's a viable contender in today's competitive emulation market?
RetroCade was conceived just over a year ago when Neil Bradley and I, both of us running into roadblocks with our respective emulators, EMU and Chem, decided to start from scratch and produce an emulator whose primary focus was performance. Most of the year was spent by Neil working solo while the core of the emulator matured, and Neil wrote and rewrote a set of ASM CPU cores. We used both EMU and Chem in the early stages as test beds for ideas that would eventually find fruition in RetroCade.
We've all heard over and over again how RetroCade is an end-user product, unlike MAME, which is more geared towards arcade game documentation. Could you tell us exactly how you and the team are approaching this end-user product concept and what it will mean to the game players?
As I said before, the primary focus is performance. However, running a close second is ease of use. Generally, RetroCade works out of the box. All the user has to do to get RetroCade running is unzip it, grab some ROMs, and start playing. We've also provided a built-in front end, not simply for the launching of games, but one which will allow full configuration of the emulator, from controls and dip switches to display modes and toggling of advanced features like translucent vectors and backdrops. In addition to the simple unzip and get running approach, we've provided more advanced configuration options and a full command line interface for the power user. We're not going to force you to use our interface if you don't want to. Even dip switches can be set from the command line.
While we're speaking, the viewers are able to see shots of the front-end interface and the games themselves in operation. The screen burn-in on Asteroids is quite hauntingly familiar to myself and probably a lot of other folks watching. None of the Brand X emulators have this or the other extras like the backdrop on Discs of Tron or the extensive overlays found in Armor Attack. Is this a competition thing between your product and others, a show of dedication to faithful reproduction of the games, or what? What made you guys decide to go through the trouble of including these extras?
We don't really think of it as a competition thing. We got the idea for the backdrops and vector special effects from Peter Hirschberg's Vector Dreams emulator. It's a fantastic emulator with a bit of a performance problem. Peter was looking to rewrite it, and we invited him on the team. In fact, much of the groundwork for the current backdrop support in RetroCade was done by Peter. We know we can't compete with the Brand X emulator in sheer quantity of games emulated, so we put a lot of effort into the extra touches. Some games like Armor Attack and Warrior can't be played without the backdrops. So the addition of those backdrops was out of necessity other than flash. Others like the backdrops in Discs of Tron or the indicator light overlays on Spy Hunter, they help finish off the emulation and make the experience closer to playing the real thing.
The question on everybody's mind, Mike, is when. Although we can all appreciate the we want to wait until it's done right philosophy, can you give us any realistic expectations as to when a public release might happen?
The best answer I can give is when it's done. We're just about to distribute our first release candidate to our private beta testing team, so a public release is probably not much more than a month away. Much of the delay in getting the emulator out the door is due to the fact that we all have real jobs, and paying the bills takes precedence over our hobbies.
Currently, RetroCade is a DOS-based product that runs quite nicely so far under Windows 95-98. What about other versions? Native Windows, DirectX, Macintosh, Linux, etc. Which of these are in planning or production, and do you have estimates on when we could expect to see these releases?
We have a Win32 DirectX version that is mostly up to date with the DOS version. We have a Mac port, a whole pile of Unix ports, and even an ARM port on the way as well. All of these ports are currently in production and are in various states of completeness and working. I can't say when they'll be ready, but it will definitely be after the release of the DOS port.
There have been rumors floating around about that the Alliance Corp was considering selling RetroCade via distributing it for free use. It's also been mentioned that the source code would not be available, as is with some other emulators. Would you please comment on these topics?
As far as going commercial, we're certainly keeping our options open. The current plan is that RetroCade will be free. However, we've deliberately kept our team small and made sure that we're unencumbered on the intellectual property side, so that if someone drops a large pile of money in our laps, we can go commercial without having to rewrite large chunks of other people's code. As far as source code goes, there's no plan to make the source code for the emulator available. For those who are looking for information on what it takes to emulate a particular game, they can use the Ultimate Emulation Documentation Project. The MAME source is freely available. For those looking for performance tips or fast assembly language CPU cores, that information and source code is available freely from us. Just ask. Neil has made all of his assembly language cores available to anybody who wants to use them.
Preliminary support, quote, quote, is a pretty ugly word in the emulation scene. Will RetroCade ship with preliminary support drivers and games, or will you scratch those that don't properly function before the release? Speaking of which, how many games do you foresee making the final cut for shipping?
What we're likely to do is cut the games that don't work properly until we can figure out how to make them behave. Some games will be missing sound for lack of samples, but any problem more severe than that, and the game will get the axe. Even when we've cut the few bad eggs from the herd, though, we'll probably have close to 90 games in the shipping version.
Everybody is just writhing in their chairs about the idea of both game save states and Internet Play in RetroCade. Can you expand on these rumors? How will the save states work? Do you plan on punishing save state users by preventing their high scores from being saved or anything similar? And how long will it be before we get to see Internet Play, realistically? And will there be support for more than 2 players?
Writhing in their chairs. Okay. Well, we're currently looking at one or both of 2 possibilities. The first is that pressing a hotkey will save your game and allow you to continue playing. In this case, high score saving will be disabled. More just to avoid configuration confusion. If you change the dip switch after saving the high score, which set of dip switches should be loaded, etc. The other possibility is that the current game state will be saved when you exit the emulator or change games. This will work like a virtual uninterruptible power supply, in that when you switch away from a game and come back to it, it's exactly in the state you left it. In this case, there's no need to save the high scores. They're saved as part of the dumping of the state of the game. Internet Play or Net Play is a possibility that we're looking at, but it will be much farther down the line. Rest assured that if and when we put Net Play into RetroCade, it will be done with the end user in mind. Think something less along the lines of setting up Duke Nukem for Net Play and more along the lines of setting up Diablo for Net Play.
MAME has always had a strict redistribution clause that kept the mass distribution of ROMs and samples in packs or together for a simple, easy download forbidden. In the early days of RetroCade, it was rumored that all the ROMs would be merged together in a single pack file for easeability, both in use and for downloading. Why was this concept dropped? Will RetroCade adopt a similar restrictive distribution clause? Do you fear the anti-emulation ROM groups like the IDSA? Has anyone come down on your team yet from one of these type of groups?
In the early days, RetroCade worked in the same manner as the last version of EMU. When it found the ROMs for a particular game, it sucked them up into a pack file. However, with the addition of zip support into MAME and the standardization of zip names and the ROM names that came out of that effort, we threw out the pack code for the ROMs and replaced that functionality with zip support. So now RetroCade will just find a zip with the appropriate name and pull the ROMs right out of it. No unzipping or anything. The pack code still exists in RetroCade and is used for our art and audio assets, backdrops, samples, GUI, fonts, and overlays, etc. I've always thought that MAME's aggregation restrictions were silly. The only restrictions that we'll be imposing with RetroCade is that it's not distributed with its ROMs in the zip file, and that it's not distributed on the same CD-ROM or other removable media with the ROM images. As far as the IDSA is concerned, we've not heard from them at all. They seem to want to pick on folks who are ignorant of the law or appear to have no legal resources. Personally, I'm of the opinion that there's a special place in hell for them and their ilk. By themselves, they have no authority. They have no intellectual property to defend. They only represent other people. And as such, they have no power to stop anyone from doing anything.
Last question, Mike. Once Retrocade is shipped, how often can we expect to see upgrades? Will the upgrades take the same approach as MAME is, whereas interim releases will be public, or will the beta team in place currently be utilized as they now are for quality control until a new release ships? Once Internet Play is available, will Alliance Corp ever adopt an easy update or live update where the user can easily check for new releases and download and install them right through the interface?
My guess is that we'll continue to use the current beta team if they'll put up with us for future releases. I don't know about the spacing of those releases, but since much of the work that has gone into Retrocade has been in the core of the emulator itself, once it's released, our primary focus will be adding games to the emulator. I don't know about a live update feature. It's quite a bit of work for not much more end-user simplicity than just downloading a new zip file and unzipping. That said, if we do any kind of matchmaking service or server, a message of the day would most likely be implemented so that users could be notified of updates and new versions.
Well, Mike, thanks once again for conducting the interview with me. We really appreciate it. I'm sure all the users out there are very excited now about Retrocade. And that's going to wrap up the interview today, folks. We really appreciate Mike and all the other programmers for making an emulator for those of us bare-fed of having a P2400. Be sure to keep an eye on the big pages like Dave's Classics, Insert Coin, and, of course, Retro Radio for the latest breaking news on Retrocade. Before I go, I'd like to tell you personally why Insert Coin has decided to not carry MAME, the emulator, anymore after this version. Quite frankly, folks, MAME used to be a lot of fun. Those of you who were around when the MAME channel first opened up can remember back to when leaking a little secret here and there, a little rumor mill, which in fact got Insert Coin its start. It used to be fun. You know, everyone would wait around for the next MAME release. We'd all hog in the channel. There'd be like 100 people waiting in MAME to see when the new version was going to be released. And it was exciting. It was fun. It was even almost more fun than playing the games themselves, was waiting around in anticipation to see was Punch-Out finally going to work this release. And it was fun, and I loved being part of that. It was exciting. Then MAME started off, and in my opinion, its downfall began when it started releasing the betas public. That's when the greedy people started coming out. That's when the people who wanted the ROMs right now started sending nasty letters to the side ops, and it started to not be fun. At that point in time, we started seeing Capcom games. Of course, we all know the kind of folks that go for the Capcom games, the younger generation. And now Neo Geo, which is even worse. These earlier generation people, unlike the late 20s, early 30s folks that used to be MAME's target audience, they're akin to the Genesis and Super Nintendo people. Gimme, gimme, gimme. No, I don't want to know how to do it. I'm not going to read the README, but you'll tell me how to do it. You'll give me the ROMs and you'll like it. Frankly, folks, I get enough mail in my mailbox every single day. I don't want to fight the Neo Geo teens. I don't want to fight the Capcom teens. I don't want to deal with ROM merges and PROMs anymore. I think there should be a point where MAME stops developing and starts fixing. And so far I've got dozens of emails that say, yes, we agree with you. We're sorry to see MAME go, but it's nice you're making a stand. And that's what I'm talking about, folks, is making a stand for what I believe in. I believe Neo Geo is no longer considered classic arcade game emulation. That's why it's not being supported any further by Insert Coin. You can look forward to extensive support for Retrocade and possibly Sparcade if Dave Spicer and I can bury the hatchet. And if he's interested in supporting me, supporting him. And we'll see more about that later on. But anyway, I thought you'd like to take a few moments to hear from my mouth why I'm no longer supporting MAME. I still love MAME. I love Jackal. I love Zookeeper. Those are games I'll probably never see anywhere else. And I'm going to continue to support MAME in both Retro Radio and in my news area on Insert Coin. But the ROMs, the emulators, the front ends will no longer be available. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Retro Radio. I'd like to thank this week my guest Mike Cuddy, as well as the good folks at Digital Leisure at www.digitalleisure.com for their gracious permission in letting me show you the Dragon's Lair and Space Ace clips. They are offering these packages in full Windows 95 versions, as well as other great full-motion video products. Please give them your support. Until next week, my name's Shane Monroe. Keep it retro.